Linemen working on overhead line maintenance handle conductors carrying thousands of volts of electricity. This high voltage is constantly seeking a path to ground. That path could be the lineman's body if he's not careful. Yet, despite the high voltage all around him, a lineman can work on energized equipment in complete safety if he works with care, keeps his protective equipment in good condition, and uses proper safety practices. Keep in mind that safety practices vary from one company to another, so make sure that you know your company's procedures and that you're familiar with your company's safety manual. This program will show you how to use protective gear to put a barrier between your body and high voltage, as this lineman has done. And it will teach you good safety practices that will keep you out of dangerous situations. If you follow these procedures and those required by your company, your job as a lineman can be as safe as any other industrial occupation. If you don't, you could wind up seriously injured or dead. Accidents on overhead line maintenance can be avoided by working with care, using the right safety practices, and keeping your equipment in good condition. An important part of good safety practice is having the right attitude about your work. You must always keep your mind on the potential hazards facing you. Inattention or clowning around has no place in overhead line work. The right attitude includes a sense of responsibility for your fellow workers. Responsible linemen keep on the lookout for hazards their co-workers may not see, and they keep an eye on their partner's equipment for any defects they may have overlooked. Safety is a team effort. A lineman's responsibility also extends beyond the members of his crew. It's just as important to protect the public during overhead line work. One way to help protect the public is to mark off a safe work area. Another is to chock the wheels to keep a truck from rolling. This protects the public as well as the crew. Good communication among workers is also an important part of job safety. Every man on the job must know exactly what has to be done and what his responsibility is. Good communication starts a tailgate discussion. That's a preliminary meeting during which the foreman and crew go over what has to be done and who has to do it. It's important that everyone participate in tailgate discussions. Linemen should ask questions to clear up any points in the job they don't understand and make suggestions on how to do the job safely. Not all of the details of a job are gone over in a tailgate discussion, however. Each crew member still has to plan out the work he himself will be doing on the job. An important part of this planning is identifying obvious hazards he can see from the ground. After identifying them, he must determine what repairs, if any, are necessary. Hazards encountered on the job are generally either electrical or structural. Let's first take a look at a few examples of electrical hazards a lineman might find on a typical job. One of the primary wires on this crossarm has a broken insulator, which could pose a potential shock hazard. So this insulator will have to be replaced to eliminate this hazard. Connections, such as this primary jumper connector, can also pose a potential electrical hazard. This jumper connector is in good condition. But this one is severely burned. It's charged so badly that it needs to be replaced. A third potential electrical hazard to look for is wires with a significant difference in sag. For example, this wire has too much sag. It could start swaying back and forth from the shaking caused by a lineman climbing the pole. If it sways too far, it could hit another line and short out. To minimize sway while he's climbing, the lineman will have to go up the backside of the pole. That way, the force of his climbers hitting the pole will be in line with the wires and won't cause them to sway. If he went up this side, the pole would shake in this direction and start the wires swaying in the same direction. Well, we've seen a few examples of potential electrical hazards to watch out for. Now, let's take a look at some of the structural hazards that can endanger a lineman if he doesn't plan how to handle them before starting to work. For example, cracks or rotted sections in a pole can pose a serious hazard while climbing. If the gaff on a lineman's climber were to go into this crack, it could slip out of the wood when he puts his weight on it. A gaff could also cut out of this pole. There are no obvious cracks, but the outer layer, or shell, is rotten and too soft to hold a gaff. If the shell rot is extensive, the lineman may have to peel the outer layer off so his gaffs will sink into firm wood underneath. Shell-rotted poles should be reported to the foreman for testing. Both cracked and shell-rotted poles can be safely climbed if you're careful, but a severely rotted pole may be dangerous. Rot can extend beyond the pole's surface, deep into the wood. In fact, a pole may be rotted all the way through. This is most likely at the ground line and below, where moisture can be trapped in the pole. Tapping with a hammer is a good way to reveal rot. A rotted section makes a duller, softer sound than solid wood does. Later on in the program, we'll show you a way to determine how severely a pole has rotted. Now, since we've discussed some of the hazards you should try to spot from the ground before climbing, we should also mention a couple of other potential problems to look for before you go up a pole. Many poles have telephone cables, guy wires, cable television lines, or street signs on them that can get in your way while climbing. These are not necessarily hazardous by themselves, but they can be difficult to climb over, and you could lose your footing and fall if you're not careful. A lineman planning to climb this pole, for example, should go up this side of the pole to avoid these telephone cables. And as he climbs by the cables, he should watch carefully to make sure he doesn't stick his gaffs into them. Guy wires can also be difficult to climb around and should be avoided when possible. A lineman would plan to climb this pole from the side opposite the guy wire. There's one final obstruction we should mention: street signs attached to the pole. It's best to remove them completely rather than try to avoid them. The edges on street signs are sharp and can cause an injury if you slip and fall on them. Well, now that we've seen some obvious safety hazards that can be identified from the ground, let's turn to another important safety practice: proper equipment storage. Equipment should always be stored in an orderly way. In fact, good housekeeping, keeping your equipment in good order, is an important safety practice that's sometimes overlooked. Proper storage keeps equipment from getting underfoot and possibly tripping someone. It also protects the equipment from being damaged. That's important with rubber gear, or rubber goods as it's sometimes called, like line hose. Punctures in them can be extremely dangerous. Ropes and lines are protected from damage by hanging them on hooks where they won't get stepped on. Another type of equipment that should be carefully stored is hot sticks. Hot sticks are insulated fiberglass sticks used to handle energized lines and equipment. They're protected by keeping them in a rack where they won't get nicked, scratched, or dirty. We'll go into greater detail on protecting and using safety equipment in the next part of the program. We'll discuss hot sticks, rubber and plastic insulating covers, ropes, lines, and personal protective gear. You'll see how to maintain, inspect, and test your equipment so you can be confident it's safe to use. Confidence in your equipment leaves you free to concentrate on using the right procedures to do your work